Welcome to Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast. My name is Reika and I am your host. I hope you're having a good day as you are listening to this podcast episode. And I want to say welcome if you are a new listener and welcome back if you are a regular listener. And I appreciate every single one of you who choose to turn this on and choose to listen to this podcast this week. So this podcast, Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast, was started about 2 years ago. It's going to be 2 years at beginning of 2026. And I have been releasing new episode every Monday for almost 2 years straight. And it's been a lot of learning process and it's been quite a journey, and I feel like I got to meet and talk with so many amazing yoga teachers across the world, and I'm very, very grateful for this podcast. So I get to interview full-time yoga teachers from across the world to kind of hear their journey, their stories of why and how they are doing what they are doing. How are they making teaching yoga as their full-time job? How is it possible? What kind of streams of income do they have? And these kind of juicy questions that I always wanted to ask when I was a newer full-time yoga teacher. And I really want to share this kind of stories on the podcast because I wish I had podcasts like this to listen to when I was trying to navigate being a full-time yoga teacher in the beginning of my career. But I really want to highlight how different everyone's journey is, and there's no one right way to do it. And being a full-time yoga teacher is not better than being a part-time teacher. So I do sometimes interview part-time teachers as well as teachers who used to be a full-time and who have completely switched their career to something else. And I think these are all interesting and helpful information and also fun to learn from others. So I hope you're enjoying this podcast. And today's episode is the third of this mini-series about anatomy, the conversations I've been having with Olga. Before we get started on today's episode, I want to mention a couple of announcements. Announcement number one is about the upcoming workshop that's happening this weekend, which is December 6th, Saturday, of 2025. The workshop is from 2 to 4 p.m. and the workshop is called Busting Yoga Alignment Myth. And the guest teacher for this workshop is Thomas. Thomas is a doctor of physical therapist here in Long Beach, California. And I have been shadowing Thomas for the last several months to just learn from him and to observe how he works with his patients. And it's been really, really fun for me. I'm learning so much from shadowing him and being around physical therapy environment and learning from Thomas on how he uses strength training as one of the forms and method of healing people's injuries and just encouraging everybody to be living more healthier lifestyle. So it's been so fascinating for me, and it has really got me to think more seriously about the importance of strength training. Before I get off topic about all my thoughts and experience on shadowing Thomas, let's talk about the workshop. So I invited Thomas to be a guest teacher for my mentorship program for yoga teachers. We do monthly workshop, and this month it's going to be Thomas teaching a workshop on yoga alignment myth. He is not a yoga teacher, he is a PT. So he get to kind of bring this fresh perspectives on movement and what is the view from the PT world of some of these alignment myth and traditions in yoga world that has been passed on. I think once you're so deeply steeped in the yoga world, we just believe these alignment as a norm and these alignment as the way we should be practicing, way we should be teaching, the way we should be cueing. But how much of what we have been saying and believing in, and that has been passed on over the years from teachers to students to teacher to students, actually has a legitimate reasoning of why behind it from PT perspective and from the movement science perspective. So I am very much looking forward for this workshop where we can kind of dissect some of these alignment myths that exist in yoga and see it and think about it from a different perspective, from another modality's perspective. So that is why I'm bringing Thomas on. This workshop is in person here in Long Beach, 2 to 4 p.m. California time, but it's also going to be live streamed on Zoom. If you want to join from another location, another city, another time zone, you can still join this workshop through Zoom. And it's also going to be recorded. So if you want to watch the recording later, that option is available for you. The workshop is super accessible. It is a sliding scale of $10 to $60. So I hope you can make it. We really try hard to make this continuing education workshop affordable and accessible to many. So if you have any questions, please let me know. I hope you can make it. And the link to register for the workshop will be on the show notes. Another announcement is that I am opening up registration for my mentorship program for yoga teachers for 2026. The next module is from January of 2026 all the way until April of 2026, total of 4 months. So 4 months makes one module, and we meet monthly for yoga philosophy. We meet monthly for Q&A sessions, pranayama and meditation sessions. We do practice teaching session. We have one-on-one that you can sign up for, as well as monthly workshop of specific topic, whether I bring in guest teachers to teach that or whether I teach that myself. But it is an amazing yoga community, yoga teachers community that you can be part of. And we do offer in-person live stream Zoom and pre-recorded recordings, as well as we record the live meetings so you can watch those meetings later. But what I really love is this community that gets built of yoga teachers who support one another. So I really love this community aspect of it, where we chat about yoga teachers stuff that you may not be able to talk so much in depth about with other people in your life. Or sometimes we have yoga teacher friends, but we just see them in passing and we don't really get to sit down and have like a deep conversation that's very, very relatable for yoga teachers. So that's the kind of community I am trying to cultivate. If you're interested in joining my mentorship program for the New Year's, January to April of 2026, I'll put the application link on the show notes so you can apply online. And after you submit your application form, I will be sending out an email to ask you questions or invite you into the mentorship program. It's a really, really supportive, welcoming, and friendly community. So I hope you consider joining the mentorship program. I think that's all the announcements I have for this week. So let's get started on this week's episode with Olga. This is the third of this mini series that Olga and I recorded. We have been talking all about anatomy and why anatomy is important for yoga teachers to learn. And first week, we talked about our anatomy experience and our anatomy educational experience, as well as what we recommend. And second week, we talked about anatomical variation and how our body moves, which was a really fun episode for me to chat to Olga about. And this week's conversation, we chat about whether yoga is a all-rounded, balanced movement practice for our life, or whether we think doing more than yoga might be more of a balanced movement practice, movement diet in your life. And I really enjoyed talking about this topic with Olga, and obviously Olga always has such a beautiful insights to add. So I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation with Olga, and if you have questions, you can always reach out to me or Olga through Instagram or message us on our website. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation, and I will speak to you on the other side. Welcome back, Olga, to Full-Time Yoga Teacher podcast. This is the third and the final mini-series of Why study anatomy as a yoga teacher? And we have been talking about anatomy in the past 2 episodes. The first episode, we talked about how we got into anatomy, why it's important to learn about anatomy as a yoga teacher, as well as we gave a lot of great recommendations for different continuing education for anatomy. And then on the second episode last week, we talked about anatomical variation, which I love that topic, as well as the different movement of the body and how knowing that can be beneficial for yoga teachers teaching the anatomy-informed yoga class. And today, we are back to talk about kind of like movement patterns, how body moves together. And as well as we want to also get into exercise science of what yoga is good at, and also maybe some areas that maybe yoga may not offer as much, so we might have to seek out somewhere else for that. But let's get into first movement patterns. Share with us a little bit what your thought on this topic.
Yeah, so I think movement patterns and chains is another super interesting area, and it sort of zooms out from the previous one that we talked about. So previously we talked about here is the muscle, this is what it's doing. Now it's stretching and now it's contracting, and that's eccentric and that's concentric. So you have this very isolated view of the body. And I think what really happens for us to do next, is to zoom out and look at how the body tends to move together, what associations happen in the body. And I think Threes Fizzy Yoga is like a champion in teaching this. They really love this topic specifically. And it is for a good reason, because it is such a useful thing for us to have better eyes as yoga teachers.
Mm-hmm. I love the movement patterns. And I think in Threes Fizzy Yoga, they taught us in like associated movement pattern and disassociated moving pattern.
Yeah.
And you can kind of think about it. I heard a yoga teacher and PT have saying like optimal movement pattern versus suboptimal movement patterns. So this whole idea of how when you reach your arms overhead, other part of the body is also moving to find that movement. And like everybody could have slightly different patterns of different parts of the body moving to be able to reach the arms overhead. So I want to give my example, because this is my like forever work that I'm working on, is I have tight shoulders. And I probably said this so many times on this podcast, but I have really tight shoulders in terms of reaching arms overhead, flexion. And because I have tight shoulders, to be able to reach my arms overhead 180 degrees, which is just straight up to the ceiling, my movement patterns, and possibly slightly suboptimal movement pattern, is that I push my rib cage forward and kind of move into a back bend to be able to reach my arms overhead. So I'm actually borrowing the range of motion from other part of my body, my back, to compensate a slight lack of or less range of movement I have in my shoulders to be able to reach that 180 degrees. So I hope that gave a kind of good visual example of what movement patterns could look like.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because your body will find a way to do something, and that's its amazing quality. If you don't have this range, you will borrow it from your lower back. What's quite interesting about this topic generally is that often this comes with no awareness that it's actually happening, and it gets associated together. So the arm reaching and the back become sort of one. In the brain maps of the body, right? So what we can start doing is disassociating those things and teaching the body to move independently as well as move in concert and move together, different parts. It's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a bad thing to move your lower back with your arms, but are you aware that it's happening, and do you have other options? I think that's when it becomes interesting.
I love that. You know, what's fascinating about this smart flow method is we think about this movement patterns, and we try to cue, like reaching arms overhead, we try to cue 2 opposite cue to get students to find the middle. So for example, reaching your arms overhead, as you soften the front lower ribs down towards the navel or something like that. So it's this like one cue is going to get them into one direction, and other cue is almost like bringing them out of that direction. And can we cue those two together for the students to find their work for that movement pattern in their body.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why I love Smart Flow. It's such a like interesting way to think about the movement and body and
Yeah, and it's so empowering, isn't it?
yeah. And how does it show up for you when you're teaching or what you're seeing when you're teaching in your students?
Yeah, so there's so many different examples where you can see what's happening when you look at a different body part. So you'll see
Mhm.
someone in warrior two, maybe their knees like going inward, and you're looking at it with your education, you're going like it's not necessarily a problem, but what is happening? Why is it in that position? And then maybe you'll notice that person is pronating their foot. So the foot is on the inner edge there. So they don't have this full grounded connection of the foot to the floor. And if you want to teach them to ground their foot to the floor, that will oftentimes make that knee go into a middle position from that place.
Mhm.
And again, you always remember it's not about necessarily safety. The knee's not going to explode because it's in that position. But what are we
Yeah.
trying to teach? Maybe we're trying to teach that better grounding, that sense of connection to the floor and drawing up from the floor,
Mhm.
which becomes really useful as a teacher.
Yes.
So
You
that's
know, yeah, I love that example of Warrior 2 because it kind of relates to last week's episode where we talked about how much your knees can open in Baddha Konasana, butterfly pose, whether it's the shape of your bones or whether it's your soft tissues. That also has an effect. So, amount of your adduction of your knees out and how much range of motion the student have there can also have an effect on whether knees kind of going in or not. And that can be like adjusted with maybe having a wider stance in a warrior too. Maybe you don't have to do heel to arch. Maybe you want to try heel to heel, or maybe
mhm.
you do better if it's a little bit wider than heel to heel. And I think being able to make those kind of connections and kind of troubleshoot, like, is it the foot? Is it the hips? Like,
What's the
I think that's
connection
what
here?
makes it
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, and sometimes maybe you just rotate the pelvis a little bit forward in towards like warrior one, and suddenly you're lessening that rotation that you're talking about. The inner thighs are
Mm.
getting less stretched, and suddenly, bang, you've solved it.
Yeah. And it makes me feel like a little detective. Like, like I'm like trying to figure out or troubleshoot, trying to see the student's whole body. It kind of makes it fun as a teacher, I think.
Yeah, and I think like I said, out and seeing, looking at the whole person and seeing where do I start? Where do I think we might begin this exploration? And sometimes you'll see that someone just doesn't have enough rotation in the hips and they're trying to get the hips off to the side and it's just not working for them. And
Mm.
perhaps they're exaggerating their like lumbar spine curve. So you can maybe see that and that will give you a clue to then troubleshoot the pose. Yeah, so I think that that's quite useful.
Yeah, and I think this kind of like really hits home with the idea that there's no one correct alignment for every single student's body. It's going to require different kind of alignment, like whether it's heel to heel to arch, or whether, I don't know, arms should be 180 degrees or not, those kind of things. I think it makes, as a yoga teacher, I'm much more less focused on this is the right alignment that everybody must follow.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying is that it's useful also to adjust people if that's what you're doing. Maybe you're assisting, maybe you're adjusting, maybe you're just verbally creating an experience for them. And you can do that much more meaningfully if you have this sort of zoomed out vision and you can see how the things are relating together.
Hmm. Do you have any other common examples that you see movement patterns, whether it's a positive or suboptimal movement patterns in your students?
The one I keep thinking about is the scapulohumeral rhythm, which is again to do with shoulder flexion. And I think oftentimes we'll hear it cued to people will say to like drop the shoulder down when the arm is going overhead. And it does go against the natural movement of the shoulder complex. The scapula wants to go up as you lift your arms up. So I guess knowing that and knowing that this works in concert and together and it's natural then allows you to cue things like Urdhva Hastasana or maybe downward facing dog, anywhere that your arms are overhead. Yeah, and you can see what's happening. And you'll also see when someone is depressing the shoulder blade and maybe they're looking uncomfortable. Maybe it feels like, something's pinching in their shoulder. Maybe they tell you after class, like, I get this every time. And then you go into this brain, zoom out and see how their shoulder's moving. You'll be able to troubleshoot better.
Yes. Oh my God. I'm so glad you brought that up. I think Karen and I did this conversation about the cues that we used to say we no longer say anymore, of the shoulders down the back, away from your ears when we're in shoulder flexion poses. And I still, to this day, almost every module of mentorship that I do, that's like a feedback I give my mentees when they do practice teaching. I still hear that cues from my mentees. I still hear those cues out in the yoga world. And I explain it. I made a tutorial on it. Like, I have so many resources on this topic for, yoga teachers who want to learn from me in my mentorship group. But it still happens every single module. So I think it's still, I guess we still have to, as a yoga teacher as a whole, we still have to keep educating people on this topic. But I guess another question I usually always get at the follow-up for when I talk about the movement of the shoulder blades, the scapula, is like, what do you say instead? So do you have any suggestions on what do you say when you're teaching shoulder flexion poses?
Yeah.
Like down dog?
I either say nothing if I'm seeing that it's just working as it should. If I see someone depressing, I'll probably say, let your shoulder blades rise naturally and see what that does. That's probably the one that I would go for.
Yeah, same. I usually
allowing.
don't. Yeah. I usually don't say anything about the shoulders blades in the arms overhead poses. And sometime in like teacher training setting, I've heard my teacher use this, and I sometimes use, but it's very technical, so it's not going to be in a normal yoga class setting. But inner border of shoulder blades sliding down, and the outer border of shoulder blades like spreading wide and up. But that's very technical for most people who just taking a weekly yoga class at Wednesday at 9 a.m. So,
Yeah.
but it's a good one to know. Yeah.
Definitely.
I love that. I'm so glad you brought that up. Anything else with the movement patterns?
Yeah, so why it's useful, we mentioned meaningful adjustments so that we can make people more comfortable in the poses and we know where to start looking. We can troubleshoot discomfort in poses, again, based on that. And I love we become better at seeing people, that zoomed out lens that we mentioned. And I think it also helps with transitions. So making your transitions between the poses a little bit more smooth.
Yeah. I have a question. Like, how do you know if the certain movement pattern is okay? Like, I guess optimal, suboptimal is.
Yeah, I think I always come back to awareness and also knowing that the body's not fragile. And I do want to teach that there isn't fragility in your body. And if your body's using it that way, it potentially is a positive adaptation because it just wants to achieve the goal that you've set out. But I think as yoga teachers, we have such a great opportunity to teach people more awareness of their body so that they are more empowered in the body that they live in. I don't necessarily tend to think right or wrong, but think about, is there awareness and can we introduce many different options?
I love that. And I think that kind of reminded me of, I always like to think, and how I've been taught from my teacher, Annie Carpenter's. As a teacher, I'm trying to shine a light on people's blind spot. I had no idea that I was backbending every time I reached my arms overhead until one day I finally realized that was my movement patterns, that I was making up for the lack of range of motion in one joint by borrowing it from another joint. I had no idea about that. So that was completely my blind spot that I wasn't noticing. And from practice and inquiries and exploration and great teachers showing me, I realized that was my blind spot. And I think as a great teachers, we can shine a light on students' blind spots, some patterns and habits they might have that they don't realize that they have. And that can become a beautiful exploration, just noticing that awareness you said, whether it's something you have to like fix, quote unquote, fix it, or quote unquote, just noticing that and trying trying different ways to see how that feels, or noticing, oh, I had no idea I had tight blah blah blah, and that's why I'm doing this movement pattern. So I think just kind of shining light on blind spot, and that's kind of that weaves into the philosophy of yoga. And sometimes we realize we have patterns and habits, not only physically, but how we think, how we live our life, how we behave. And yoga practice and practice of self-reflections and inquiry can really shine a light on those kind of habits. That's not only on your yoga mat physically, but also our day-to-day habits, how we live, how we think. So I think that's just self-awareness, self-reflection is such a beautiful tool that yoga teaches us and give us.
Yeah, and just to finish off this point, we do swim in the sea of it depends as yoga teachers and as movement educators, which keeps me so interested and keeps me coming back to studying more because it is so interesting and not always one simple answer to these questions necessarily. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Well, let's move on to the next topic of what is yoga doing and not doing.
Oh, yeah. So I think as an area of anatomy, or let's call it exercise science, and I think it's just a basic understanding of healthy movement and how yoga fits in that landscape of healthy movement and how it helps people and also what it doesn't necessarily do, which isn't a problem. Yeah, so if we are looking at a yoga practice, generally speaking, on average, we'll have things like stretching, we'll have work active range of motion sometimes, depending how it's taught. We're doing low level loading with body weight only. We're training body awareness, proprioception. Sometimes we do some maybe skill training if we're into that. Maybe we're teaching handstands or something like that. And then also we have the rest, the nervous system downregulation, the breath, the meditation. So those are the things that yoga excels at and it's great for doing. But those aren't all things that we need to do to be healthy.
Tell us what's missing? What else do we need to, what is necessary or what's beneficial for us as a like functional being?
Yeah, so if you look at the like adult recommendations of what your healthy movement, let's say diet should be, it lists strength training in it, like loaded strength training and endurance. So some form of cardio. You could expand it to like power training, which is like generating strength fast. And you could look at impact training as well. So anything like jumping and things like that.
So true. Plyometric is the word that I've keep coming back to, especially with my running training. It's like how important plyometric is, that loading, jumping, hopping, all that. It can be very beneficial. And like you say, cardio and strength training that is loaded more than just your body weight. Those things are not typically included in yoga class unless you take some kind of yoga hybrid fitness class. Maybe there's some cardio jumping jacks or something in it, or you use dumbbells in yoga class for certain sculpt class. So yeah, this is another one. This is another narrative that I think old school yoga teacher have. Or maybe some people disagree with me and that's okay. But I think I heard this narrative a lot more 10 years ago than I do now. But this belief that yoga is enough, like you don't need
Mhm.
any but yoga, and that's all you need to live a healthy life. And I used to believe that as well, because like I said in the maybe 2 episodes ago, I was discouraged to run or discouraged to do strength training outside of yoga by my teacher, especially because I was more on a tighter size. So I was discouraged to do those things so I can quote unquote open up my body.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and I used to believe that as well. And definitely now I do a lot of movement practices outside of yoga, like lifting heavy weights and running and plyometrics, jumping. And more I learn, I feel like those things are so important for just like healthy, balanced body. But one thing that I personally prefer, this is everyone's going to be very different, but I personally prefer to keep yoga, and then I do the other modality of movement as a separate thing. And this is just my preference, and not, I don't push this preference on everybody, but I like to keep yoga because I feel like there's a spiritual aspect to the practice of yoga personally for me. So I like to practice yoga as yoga, and I don't want to feel that expectation or pressure to try to do all the strength training, cardio, plyometrics included in the yoga class. I like to teach yoga as yoga, and then I like to go to the gym for other things. I kind of rambled on for a while, but what about you? What kind of other movement practices do you do? And also any thoughts on what I just shared?
Yeah, so what jumps out, and yes, I do most of the things as well, same as you, with endurance,
Mhm.
with strength. I try to include more impact training. But so, yeah, I think maybe yoga has been sold as this complete practice because it has this spiritual edge to it. It feels a bit mystical, you know.
Mhm.
Maybe that misunderstanding made people think that the physical portion is also complete when it isn't. So I think, and sometimes you see people either like openly or sort of, it's like implied that they criticize exercise and sort of allude, like kind of say that everything has to be middle and done with breathing and very calm. And so as soon as you start doing strength training, you're not going to be able to avoid effort. When you're doing heavy lifts, you're lifting something you can only lift 6 times. It's going to be really difficult. People make noises, sweat, like it's not pretty. And it's really, really good for you. It's one of the most amazing things that we can do in our movement
Mhm.
practice, you know?
Mhm.
So, and I think in a discipline that really champions non-harming, I think it's really important that we understand where yoga lives in this landscape of exercise, and then we don't put people off doing something that is really good for them, right?
Yeah, so true. For example, I hear a lot from Jason Crandall, which I think he makes a pretty good point of there's not a lot of pulling movement and action in yoga. There's a lot of pushing in yoga. For example, a lot of plank, down dog, arm balances, chaturanga, even handstand is pushing, but
Yeah.
not a lot of pulling action in yoga, and how you can try to bring those movement into a yoga class, but probably you can do that easily at the gym, right? Like any kind of cable or banded work, you can really get that pulling action. Is there anything in particular you think, like you say, in general, cardio and strength training is not a big part of the yoga practice, but is there any like movement or action or strength, certain part of the body that you think yoga is missing in?
Sure. So, like we talked about anatomy, like we talked about parts and then zooming out and understanding how everything works. All of this knowledge allows you to look at yoga or your own sequence, even, and see whether you have included as much as you can, whether it's balanced for the joints or whether it isn't. And I think if you didn't think about it at all and just drew on, the poses that are well known, you might end up always stretching your hamstrings and always going into external hip rotation. That would be the bias of a yoga practice. Even like Jason Crandall, actually, he made the point of counting how many hip flexion there is in a sun salutation. And I can't remember the number, but it was something like 8 to 2. So
Sure.
8 flexions to 2 extensions or neutral hip. So fact check me,
Yes.
but it's quite close to that. So I think we've got internal hip rotation that we can add extra. We can
Yeah.
just take out some hip hamstring flexibility or external rotation,
Mhm.
focus a bit more on extension, hip extension, shoulder rotation. I think that exists. Probably more
Mhm.
flexion, shoulder flexion than anything else really that we do.
Mhm.
Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I love that example from Jason's of how many hip flexions are in sun salutation versus hip extension. And when I first heard him talk about that, my mind was blown. And I bring that up in every single teacher training that I teach. It blows people's mind as well. And I love how he says, like, he does a lot of emphasis on doing locust pose, shalabhasana, cobra pose to strengthen the back more, because that's also kind of what we're missing in the modern day habits of our body for just sitting a lot and working on a computer a lot. We're not really strengthening the posterior chain or the back of the body. So definitely that was a very fascinating thing for me to open my mind up into. How do you try to bringing internal rotation in your yoga class? Then if so, how do you try to bring that in?
One of my favorites is to do deer or stag legs instead of pigeon pose. So that gives you
Uh-huh.
that internal rotation on the back leg. You could do a twist towards that leg just to increase that internal rotation a little bit.
What pose is that? I'm trying. I don't know the deer.
So 90-90. on the floor.
Oh, yes. Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah, where you have that internal rotation. You can activate it. You could try to lift that back leg a little bit. Um,
Yeah.
I actually made myself a little spreadsheet when I looked at different ranges of motion and which poses hit that spot. And there was not as many for internal rotation, so it's quite important to actually consider it, or at
Yeah.
least not make it super biased towards one range of motion.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's such an interesting point. I have not thought about there's a lot more external rotation, but not a lot of internal rotation in yoga and how to bring that in. But I love the 90-90. I like doing that a lot. So that's a good one to bring in for sure.
Yeah, you could
In
even
my Huh?
do in tree pose. You could go internally rotate and then externally rotate. You could be quite creative with it if you wanted to.
Yes, it's so true. And sometime, like I said in the maybe previous episodes, I try to bring in exploration of range of motion. So definitely ask people to okay, now internal rotation, external rotation, those kind of exploring of that range of motion, I do bring. But I now that you said that, I want to kind of start to think and get more creative on how I can bring in a little more internal rotation focus into
Yeah,
a class.
definitely.
So I guess to wrap up, why is this helpful? Why is this helpful for us as a yoga teacher to be aware of?
Yeah, so just help people's health and well-being, and that we encourage people to do as much healthy movement as they can. I think this really fits with our principle of non-harming that we have. Um, so we can also just push back if we hear these ideas being presented. We can also perhaps have a voice and say. Um, I think it's just coming from the simple duty of care, because whether you want it or not, to some people or to a lot of people, you are representing either fitness or movement industry in some way. And I know this is a longer conversation, but I think this is just the situation that we're in. And I think people don't really realize how much or actually how little anatomy education there can be in these trainings. And they see you as authority on their movement. So actually, your words can have so much impact on whether someone goes or doesn't go to do their strength training or their impact training or endurance. So yeah, I think that influences how we sell our classes, how we market our classes, should I say, how we talk about what we're doing in classes. Yeah, do you agree?
Yes, I agree that whether you realize it or not, I think as a yoga teacher, we do have an influence in terms of what we say matters. Some people do view us as a quote unquote expert, whether you think so or not. So I think what we say matters. So I think that is why I'm such a huge component of continuing education as a yoga teacher. 200-hour teacher training is great, but that's not enough. I feel like every yoga teachers need to continue educating themselves in different topic. And this mini series, we focus a lot on anatomy, but there's so many different ways you can continue to educate yourself in yoga. I think it's so important to be informed as a yoga teacher, because what we say, it does have an influence, and we want to be making sure saying something that is helpful and non-harming, that is not causing any more harm, and that has a positive, hopefully, impact or influence in people, but also greater world. And
Yeah.
that's why I love continuing education. I recommend and advocate for that. It's 200 hours is just a beginning. And that doesn't mean I'm telling everybody to go take 300-hour teacher training either. There's so many options out there. It doesn't have to be committed to whole 300. There just are so many. And I think go back to the first of this mini series where we give a lot of our recommendations of anatomy, continuing education. But yeah, definitely keep learning.
And just to add to that point, I think what's really fascinating is that sometimes we hear, yes, but yoga is more than, quote, just movement. And it obviously has all of these components that are super healthy and so good for us. But so do other exercise modalities in a more covert way, so to speak. So there was some amazing research recently looking at how amazing benefit came out from strength training for people's mental health. It was, I think, I can't remember the order, but the most impactful, I think, was dance. Then we had strength training, and then we had yoga. So even beyond the physical, there are so many, even though it's not overt so much in strength training, we don't think about acceptance maybe in a strength workout, but it does improve people's mental health, and not only physical, but also mental health, which I think for me is also so important that we encourage that.
Yes, so true. I love that. I love that reminder. And I also just love hearing that dance was number one. That's really cool. And I can kind of see like dancing, good for your soul, good for, I
I
can
mean,
totally see like good
social.
for mental health. Yeah, it's social
Yeah.
as well.
I heard someone recently who was a bit older who said they went to a yoga class, and what they really were missing is a social connection. That the class was everyone was very focused on themselves. No one really said hi to anyone. And maybe
Yeah.
sometimes if you are in this introspective mode, that's what happens. But, if you go to a dance class, you'll have like a community, sociable experience, which could be great
Yeah.
for you.
Yes. And I think some yoga studio does a really good job of cultivating community.
Yes.
Maybe they have a lot of community events, or some
Yeah.
studio have like a communal space where everybody's having a tea and
Yeah.
chatting before or after class. So definitely it can be found, but it kind of depends on the studio, I guess. Yeah.
And I think all these things can work together to help us make people healthier and on so many levels.
So true. Well, thank you so much, Olga. This was a really fun conversation for me to have. I think we covered a lot in all 3 episodes of this mini series. And thank you for coming back. And we definitely will have you back again for another topic that we can geek out on.
Yay. Thank you for having me. I'd love to come back as well.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. And this week's episode was the last and the final episode of this mini-series I did with Olga. I hope you enjoyed listening to all 3 of these mini-series, all about anatomy. And I hope it gave you some food for thoughts to think about, as well as maybe inspiration to continue studying anatomy or whatever topic in yoga that you want to continue your education on. I do want to remind you of the 2 announcements I had at the beginning of the episode. First one is the workshop coming up this weekend, December 6th, Saturday, with Thomas. We are having a workshop for yoga teachers or any movement instructors, movement lovers, personal trainers, Pilates teachers, all about alignment myth in yoga world. The workshop is called Busting Yoga Alignment Myth, and Thomas, the physical therapist, is going to be there so we can look at some of the yoga alignment cues and maybe think a little bit critically about these alignment that we have been taught over the years. I'm very much looking forward for this workshop, and I hope you can join. The information and the registration link is on the show notes, as well as I am opening up application for next module of my mentorship program for yoga teachers. I hope you can join this wonderful, supportive community of yoga teachers where we can discuss, learn, and support one another to be the best teacher we can be in the yoga world. So that is it from me this week. If you have any questions, you can always message me on my Instagram, which is at Reika Yoga, ReikaYoga, or you can message me through my website, www.reikayoga.com. It would mean a lot to me if you can rate or review or star or subscribe or whatever you can do in whatever platform you're listening to this podcast from. This means a lot to me. And most importantly, if you could share this podcast with your friend or your yoga teacher or your yoga community, that would be super helpful for this podcast. Lastly, I appreciate you for listening all the way till the end, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day and talk to you next week. Bye.